we don't know because we've never measured it. And that's another big part of process improvement. But be cordial, always be cordial. And there is evidence. Eventually you'll have it in your head. But I bring notes. I bring literature. I do my lit reviews before I go because they are going to ask you that question. And you have to be prepared to answer that. Either it's, CDC HICPAC, it's FDA, it's Amy, whatever, it's facility policy.
Infection stops where information starts. Welcome to the Transmission Control Podcast, where knowledge is your strongest defense. Broadcasting from the front lines of healthcare, we dive into the strategies, science, and stories shaping infection prevention today. Each episode, we connect you with experts on real-world insights to help you stop the spread of healthcare-associated infections, protect patients, and strengthen your practices as an infection prevention and public health expert. When the right information reaches the right people, lives are saved.
Hello and welcome to the Transmission Control Podcast. My name is Garrett Hollenbeek. I'm joined today by Jill Holdsworth and a very exciting guest, Julia Jackson. We're going to talk about how to make process improvement not only sustainable, but engaging, dynamic, and even a little bit fun. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Brought to you from the studios of Healthcare HQ, let's get into it. This is Transmission Control.
Hello and welcome to the Transmission Control Podcast. My name is Garrett Hollenbeek, Editor-in-Chief of Transmission Control, and I'm joined today by two superstars in the IP world. Welcome to our host, Jill Holdsworth. How you doing, Jill?
Hey, what's up, Garrett? Editor-in-Chief sounds pretty nice behind your name.
Yeah, I keep adding made-up titles just to make myself feel good. So eventually it'll be like those. Yeah, eventually it'll be like those royal court ones where it's like,
the honorable Garrett.
Yeah. 3 lines of credentials.
I like it.
Earl of the Autoclave, all these things.
Earl of the Autoclave.
I love that.
Yeah, that's it.
Don't tell Hank that one. He'll steal it.
No, we coined it here first.
Uh-huh. So today we are joined by Julia Jackson. And Julia, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you. Greetings from the polar vortex in Michigan. It's -3 today without wind chill, so definitely an indoor day. So I am an infection preventionist. I am a certified surgical technologist. I've been in the field of healthcare pretty much my entire adult life. And I've worked in academic settings, clinical settings. I've been an administrator, academic healthcare, and ambulatory long-term care. So I've got a lot of perspective, I think, and I'm lucky to have gained that. So I have a lot of experience in clinical, surgical, regulatory, medical devices. So it kind of progressed from academics, scrubbing in the OR. I'm a germ nerd. So, IP was a natural transition. And I think I was the first surgical technologist in the country to become an IP. And I'm now a CIC. And I had great mentors there at Michigan. And I'm sure you know some of them out there. And so I did that. And that's where I really, really, really learned how to do process improvement because we did a ton of it. And I took that on with my, subsequent positions at the FDA and Nanosonics and as a consultant. So I do a lot of that. And then I look forward to sharing what I've learned and some of the things that work for me. I've had epic failures as well. So I'll share a little bit of everything. Thank you.
I love it. And we were I myself, as a Buckeye fan, was really hesitant to have you on the podcast.
Yeah.
But seeing as we won the national title last night, I figure it's okay. But the better reason to have you on the podcast is because this whole season we're talking about the IP orientation journey. And in that, IPs work so hard to implement changes, to make improvements, and sometimes they get sustained. But at least in my experience, more often than not, you roll out this great plan and it can fall flat. And so we want to talk about some of those tips and tricks and knowledge, and we want to hear about the failures too for new IPs out there.
So sustaining these initiatives is very challenging, and it takes collaboration and buy-in on multiple levels. As you know, for those of you that are educators or have done any training, there's a curve. So you get good compliance and everybody is on point and plugged in for the first few months or weeks, and then there's kind of a lag and a dip. So the newness is worn off. Some people fall back into their old behaviors. Some of them never started the new behaviors. And one of the biggest reasons they do that is because there's no accountability, there's no auditing, there's no one there to say, hey, remember your PPE, and, remember to, hand hygiene when you're coming out of that room, or performing covert observations, which I've done as well, and sharing that data. Of all of these, the most important is sharing the data, and that includes more than just posting it somewhere in a passive manner. So everybody knows that infection preventionists are very cool people, and they love to engage. Whenever we get the chance, we're going to talk about how we can prevent transmission of disease and how everybody has a role in every single healthcare setting. So the staff reacts to your energy. And if you're very passionate, you're energetic, you're happy, you're supportive, then, they'll loosen up. They'll become more receptive. You definitely don't want to talk at people or seem wishy-washy or unsure of yourself, because they'll eat you up and spit you out. So you don't want to be underprepared. You'll go down in flames. They'll turn you out, and they've got things to do, and so they'll just leave. I've had people just get up and walk out early on and a lot of things, but I've also been super successful. So it's all in the planning. So you need to establish rapport, and you need to establish credibility, and you do that with sharing some of your experience and background, sharing the evidence, because that's the first thing you're going to be asked is this evidence-based? You could say, we're going to crack this door open 3 inches. Is that evidence-based? So everything, some things are not, some things are, but that's why we need to establish our rapport with the staff, working relationships. We don't want to be out there, we want to be out there boots on the ground often, and not just when you're collecting data or, once a year when you're rounding for annual reports. I used to walk through my units all the time. I had a step-down ICU. I had the OR. I had sterile processing. I had ambulatory clinics. I had regular medicine floors. I had, all kinds of stuff. So even if I didn't have anything to do there, I just stopped in to walk through, say hi, get a feel for the people, the energy on the unit, take a quick look around. I'm always looking, I'm always assessing, even if it's informally. And eventually you just get programmed for that wherever you are. And your family may, reject you a little bit. But that's just, it's how we're wired. It's what we do. And so I check in with the staff. Is there anything I can help you with? Do you have any challenges, any questions? What's going on? Are you getting what you need from us, from the infection prevention standpoint? Do you have your wipes? Do you have your PPE? Things like that.
So, Julia, just to kind of touch on one of the things that you said in the beginning that I think is so important is you said the relationships. You talked about the relationships. I think this is so important. So talking about the new IP, going through orientation, they've just been assigned their first unit to be in charge of on their own. How do you coach them to really kind of make those relationships, start forming those bonds with that unit? Because you do have to develop trust, develop that rapport. But if you're a brand new IP, even brand new to healthcare, that can be really scary, going onto a unit for the first time, talking to these super smart people and doctors for the first time. What's your advice to a new IP in that kind of setting?
It's intimidating. It really is. I do my homework. So depending on the unit I'm going to, I want to look up, what type of patients do they have? What are their clinicians doing? Things like that. The procedures that they perform, learn their terminology, right? It's maybe a challenge, but you eventually get it. Just if you could pick up a few things to throw in the conversation that shows them that you did your homework or you actually care. I had a physician once that I was doing as you're trying to run to keep up with them in the hallway, about some high-level disinfection versus low-level disinfection for PICC lines and some things like that. So I mentioned some of the angles for the ultrasonography that he used, and he's like, oh, yeah, that's right. And so we started talking then, and he was much more receptive to what I had to say, because I'm just not speaking from a blank template. I'm not just, regurgitating words. I mean, I think that's really important. And try to be, professional, but kind of loose. So I introduce myself always. Thank you for allowing, me to kind of hang out, and I appreciate your time and, things like that. I mean, it's the little things, and then go often. Don't bug, but go often. Just walk through, hey, how you doing? And then it kind of builds. It kind of builds, and you try to build that rapport. Find a couple people that you kind of connect with, and, strike up a conversation, or, hey, you have a question on this. What's your opinion on this? Can you give me some feedback as a clinician? I really want to know what you're thinking.
I like that a lot. I like that thought of asking them for their opinion, because we're not going to know everything as IPs at any point in our career. There's always something new to learn. But the people who are doing the job day in and day out, they are, the subject matter experts. And then we help kind of enhance and, support that, but it's supporting the work that they're doing. Now, with asking their opinion, because sometimes people can really rationalize the right way to do a wrong thing. So how do we navigate when somebody says, well, either I've been doing this forever and no patient's ever gotten sick. Now, we like to pretend we know that. Or show me the research study that says that this exact process is going to harm somebody.
So you can, I genuinely will thank them for their opinion, unless, it's a life-threatening situation. I'm not going to challenge it right there. I'll say, okay, thanks. I'm going to add that to my notes, and try to see what I get here. And, I appreciate you taking the time to share with me. I mean, fairly soon whether or not you're going to implement it, include it, whether it's accurate or inaccurate. The old, we've always done it this way and we've never had an infection. You learn to not make a facial expression because, my eyes roll back in my head, and, you don't want to do that. And because you've never measured it before, just like with endoscopy infections, we don't surveil those. We don't do surveillance for ultrasound infections, so we don't know because we've never measured it. And that's another big part of process improvement. But be cordial, always be cordial. And there is evidence. Eventually you'll have it in your head. But I bring notes. I bring literature. I do my lit reviews before I go, because they are going to ask you that question. And you have to be prepared to answer that. Either it's, CDC HICPAC, it's FDA, it's Amy, whatever, it's facility policy. There's a lot of different resources. So I say err on the side of just be appreciative and polite.
One of my favorite sayings along that line is, well, we passed Joint Commission doing this, so it must be okay. I feel like I hear that all the time, but it doesn't mean that it's okay. It just means they either didn't look at it, or they didn't notice, or you cleaned up your act before the surveyors came around. So there's always, one of those stories. But another thing that you said earlier, Julia, I wanted to come back to was some advice again for IPs that maybe don't know quite how to grasp this. So the very first thing that you said was we do these PI projects, everybody gets excited, and the compliance with whatever you're doing is really good up front. But do you have any advice or examples of something that went really well as far as the sustainability or the follow-up and how you can do that really well? Because it is hard, because by the time you get a new project going, 2 months down the road, you've already got more projects going. You don't have time to necessarily go back and follow up on all of the original ones. So what advice do you have or examples do you have that maybe went better than expected?
So very few out of the gate went really well. It usually had a few iterations. We did some tweaks, unless it's a very simple, basic project in one unit, things like that. The hardest part of the process improvement is how to figure out how to get started with the process improvement. So I have a couple of examples, but I tend to keep it simple. So there's Six Sigma, there's Lean, there's all kinds of project management. So at the very core, they all focus on plan, do, check, act. And there's the DMAIC, DMAIC or whatever, and that's the Six Sigma. Essentially, that's the same thing, right? It's just a more complex version, and it's looking at waste necessarily. I find the PDCA fits really well, and you need to root cause, right? You need to learn to do a root cause and the 5 whys. I always start there, and I always start with my friend the fish. You got to pull some things together. I also tend to do the reporting in the SBAR format. So when we have it finished, a nice clean, like 1-pager, maybe 2-pager on the situation background analysis of recommendations. So very, very, almost never, one person is going to create the process improvement. So the more people, right, that are included, the better.
Can you explain your friend the fish, just for anybody who maybe didn't catch that reference?
Yeah, so the fishbone, right, the Ishikawa from TQM, I always use a fishbone because I'm a very visual person, and I put it up on a whiteboard, on a screen, or I write it on a piece of line paper. Everybody's throwing things out. So I try to inject humor in anything I do, but I call him my angry fish. We've got an angry fish, and he's really angry that this happened to the patient, or he's really sad. He's sad that this patient was, injured, or, things like that. So I use real pictures. I annotate my graphs, but use these basic. You don't have to get super fancy. Define the problem. Do we have any data? We got to look at it. The other thing I find that helps is let folks vent. Hear them, tell them you hear them, resist answering, just listen and nod and use active listening, then use a supportive statement, then get back on track, right? And some of the things I say, and these are genuine. I mean, I'm not writing this, you're writing this, I'm just collecting it and kind of organizing it. But this group is, that's why everybody's here. We need to make sure you have everything you need to do your job. This is to protect you, not the instruments, PPE. We gave XX number of patients the flu this year. Well, another XX number died. They died because we gave them the flu, these kids. And that was a reality. And that kind of, then they're like, oh, you're right, and we start thinking about not ourselves, and is it going to be annoying for us to do this, or is it making our work more complicated? Ideally, we're making your work less complicated, right? And the fewer decisions someone has to make in the course of their work, the better off everyone is going to be. If they have to stop continuously and check this, there's more chance for human error, for missing something, things like that. The fewer things they have to decide, the better. So we want to keep it simple. Standard work is really important. Also, the regulatory bodies. Listen, we got cited by Joint Commission on this. I use visual baseline data. I use a lot of visuals. When I was in my lean training, because I was lucky enough to have an employer that implemented lean training for a lot of the staff. When we were doing the hands-on projects, because we all had to do a poster or an A3, my facilitator nicknamed me the data stormtrooper. And, data tells a story. We need to interpret it, tell the story in a way that your end users and your audience can understand it. They want to do it, and then they can make it happen. Again, evidence-based. But, I usually start the ball rolling with my angry or sad fish. And, that kind of loosens things up a little bit.
Yeah, it really does. And I like that framework that you use because while it's always helpful and will always enhance our skills to have, the lean training or the process improvement background, most IPs, they may have been in nursing school 5 years ago. They may have been, and none of this is native. It's a learned skill. So I like that breakdown that helps a newer IP go into it without feeling like they have to have this huge kind of repertoire of process improvement projects under their belt. Now, one thing that I want to highlight there is when you said the term, we have to show our data and we can't just display it. We want active data. Can you break down what maybe active data looks like other than passive data?
Yes. So a lot of facilities, I've done a lot of consulting and data sharing is a pain point. Some groups and some leadership teams are still a bit old school. They don't want to share the data, right? We want to see it. We'll evaluate it, and then we'll tell people do better. We need to do this. The whole key to making this work is sharing the data with the team. So don't just post it on the bulletin board in the lounge. Let's talk about it, right? Schedule yourself on their team meetings, walk through. I do whatever I can. I always have it handy. Oh, here's an infographic. And I always have some sort of a data snippet. And I love to get on agendas. You have to learn to do it quickly because they'll say you have 6 minutes and that's all I can give you. So, you have to have that elevator pitch. Here's the data. This is what we did. I annotate the graphs so you can see, where we did some of the things, or this is what we're looking at doing. We had a group and, so-and-so and so-and-so from this unit were at the table to represent and they had some great ideas and, this is what we want to do. And so we get ready to implement. So you have to prepare people for it. Then you have to educate them why we're changing, how we're going to change, and what it should look like afterwards. And the whole, run through the cycle, adapt the change, evaluate the change, the plan, the do, the check is the observations and the monitoring. So I've been in a facility that, did hand hygiene observations. They did a quadrillion of them. But nobody ever saw the data, right? Or they only just saw the overall facility, data, or they asked people to self-acknowledge, yeah, I was compliant, 80% of the time with my hand hygiene, which, some people are honest, some people don't remember, honestly. So you want to be out there and say, here it is, we're going to share it. And I get very specific. So I customize the data to the department I'm going into. And then I tend to aggregate by roles. So I've got the nurses versus the blah, blah versus the MAs. And physicians, you're not excluded from this. I'm observing you too. And that helped, right? And also the whole thing, should it be totally covert or should we intervene? So you have to train someone who's doing this to do it the right way, having that code word or whatever you're going to do. I had one nursing home totally latch onto that, and they were off and running. And because nobody wants to call each other out, nobody wants to embarrass someone, and nobody wants to be told they're doing anything wrong. And you just have to, learn to say, hey, thanks, right? We learned that in the OR early on. If someone tells you you're contaminated, you are. You don't argue. But you say, thank you. Even a physician, thank you. Let me change that glove for you. This is why. So you have to go out and look, right? It could take 10 observations every 2 weeks. It could take 100 observations every 2 weeks. It depends on the unit, how many patients they have, and things like that. You don't have to have 1 million observations. You'll see the trending. Again, point prevalence is just that. It's what you're seeing at that date and time. The important thing about this is trends, right? You could be I've been in facilities, we started at 50%. Some were 38%. And so they watched as it goes up and up and up. So everybody's looking for the data. They're looking for the information. I know we did better, and they're using that code word. Everybody's getting on board, right? And people are not angry about it. So we have to do that. So we're analyzing it. We're checking it. We're acting again. What worked, what didn't work. So we had an point of use instrument in the units, like the medical units, the ICU, things like that. So what do you do with the instruments that you use in the room? It's usually not a lot, right? Or they may be, doing a suture removal. how does that, because the Joint Commission was really, it's when they were really gung-ho on, it has to be all the way open, and it has to be this, and it has to be that. So it does, right? But these folks are not used to doing that. So, there's a learning curve here, and the why. And a lot of people think they're doing it the right way, like, dropping it in a glove and carrying it to the soil room. We help them understand why, and sometimes we have to, just say, listen, this is the way we have to do it. This is the rule. This is what CMS says we have to do, or this is the facility policy, right? And you have to do it. So, and then getting it to the soil room and storing clean containers in the soil room that we're going to put the instruments in, and then do we soak them? Do we spray them? So there's a lot of different things. We developed standard work, right? But it looked different in all those units. So in one unit, we used different size containers. They may have used the spray, right? But they didn't wear their gloves in the hallway, and getting that message through that the outside of the container should not be contaminated. That's why you should be wearing gloves. It doesn't make sense to them. So we help them understand that. And if it's contaminated, you don't want to walk it through a hallway full of people and families. And, another unit does a lot. They have a lot, so they're going to have maybe a larger container, and then they may have a soak bin in the soil room, right? So all those little things make a difference, and those are the things that you kind of have to trial and error. We found that we tried everybody doing the same thing, and then we had to switch. We found it just didn't work, right? How far away are they? They all want to leave them in the sink. So you really have to go through it over and over. It doesn't take a long time. Okay, this didn't work. This is the feedback we got, or this is what we observed, right? And then we plan it again. What should we do to change it? And that's the group decision. That's never one person. And then you keep going. But you also have to have time frames. How are we going to audit this? How often? What's the benchmark, right? What do we want to see? What's our minimum goal? We want to improve by 20% in 6 months. It has to be measurable. And then what policy is it connected to? I always connect it to a policy or an SOP, extra information or leaders or anything like that. So it's a challenge, but it's doable, and it does take a lot of practice.
Yeah, that's absolutely a good reminder, too, for IPs working in a setting where the recommendation or the specific recommendation may be the same, but the specific workflow is going to be different for ICU than it is for the ED. And I think it's important for IPs to hear that, you're not going to have a blanket approach. There's no silver bullets in IP, and we want to make sure that our approaches, and I think, Jill, this is an area that I know I've heard you talk about some of the tailored situations and tailored approaches that you bring in with the different units that you have, especially in a big system. So in your experience, Jill, have you seen that tailored approach help the sustainability of an initiative?
A great example of this, where it's so important to tailor, and this is something my team and I talk about all the time, that you cannot treat your cardiac ICU like you do your med-onc floor. Like every floor is going to be different, every unit, every department. A great example of how this is so important is when you look at your NICU versus your adult units. They want to have everything tailored to them in the NICU because they feel like they're just kind of wrapped up under the adult bubble, and that we don't tailor things enough to them. And we did this big hand hygiene campaign for them here a couple years ago, where we let them choose their signage that went over their hand hygiene dispensers. We even let them choose their slogan that went with it. So it was very tailored to neonates. We chose with our marketing directors here, we chose neonatal baby pictures, and we really tailored the whole hand hygiene program just to the NICU. And the way that they appreciated that meant more than anything to them. And we truly feel like it drew them to doing what we wanted them to do, because they felt like they owned it, they appreciated it. And that can be transferable to anything, any unit, any project, because they felt like they were a part of it. It wasn't just being told to them. They felt like, this is special to me. because I help do this. So not just tailoring something to the unit, but having them help you tailor something to the unit is so important. And I would give that advice to any IP, no matter if you're novice or seasoned. You can't lose that part of what we do, because it's easy to say, well, this has worked every time, so I'm just going to keep doing this, because times change, people change. And with every new leader, we have to kind of adapt our strategies as IPs too.
Well said. That's fantastic.
Yep. And I like how you connected it to the patient. It's very easy to say, I'm washing my hand because I see this picture of this adorable little NICU baby, and I want to keep that person specifically safe. And I don't know, I'm probably misquoting it or saying it incorrectly, but if something bad happens to one person, that's a story. If something bad happens to a lot of people, it's a statistic. And I think IP, paring it down to the experience of the individual, can be very powerful. So, Julie, as we wrap up here, can you give us one or two go and do's for IPs to make their initiative sustainable?
Be specific, like Jill was saying, be specific also with your competency checkouts and education. Don't assume they know what you're talking about, right? I always say, I apologize if you already know this, but I want to make sure everybody's on the same page, so bear with me. I'm going to start from the beginning, and for those of us that may not. So an example of that is vendors. So we had vendors come in, and nothing against vendors, but some, when they come in to do the education or the in-service, they end up skimming over some of the important parts, like for a set. Oh, I know you already know this. Everybody knows this. You've had the set for a while. But everybody does want to know this, and, they're not going to speak up necessarily. So, it didn't take long to catch on to that, because I'm like, seriously, I want to know this. I don't know everything. I connect with the vendor, and these are the expectations. This is what I'd like you to cover. And, vague and general education and in-services are pretty much useless. And the staff really feel like it's a waste of their time. And the other thing is listen. Right? Listen to everyone. Fostering a culture of improvement takes a while, and it takes everybody, but there definitely needs to be leaders. There's formal and informal, but the lines of communication are vertical, they're horizontal, and leaders are not the ones who necessarily start the projects, right? Ideally, they're coming from the staff, because nobody knows better than the folks that are performing the task. And usually, not always, but something happens, right? So we want to debrief it and things like that. It's part of our everyday work, and anytime we ask a question or have a problem or we have a roadblock, the first thing we need to think about, and that's everybody, okay, what's our baseline? And it makes me so happy when I see folks I've worked with, they're just doing that, right? And that's the whole thing. They're doing it. Do we have a baseline? Or do we have any data? What did the audit say? Let's get some. We'll come up with some potential causes. We'll bring out, the angry fish, and try to figure out some recommendations. It is normal. I mean, and you speak the leaders speak that language, right? So you need to be able to speak the language of the leadership too, because then you will get their attention. So you don't ramble like I'm doing right now.
No, these are excellent takeaways for the audience, and excellent takeaways for any IP stepping into this process improvement world. Julie, I want to thank you so much for the insights you shared, and not just for the kind of fluffy, it went perfectly, but some of the challenges and some of the struggles that you've had as well doing PI projects. So thank you again. And how can people, if they have questions after this episode, or want to learn more about this, where can they get a hold of you?
So I have LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can email me, juliaajackson@icloud.com. Thank you for your time. Thank you for having me. I love mentoring because I had some really, really good mentors. So, I think it's really important. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Julia. It was great to have you on today.
Thank you.
All right, on today's episode, we talked with Julia Jackson, and she gave us a lot of tips that we can give to new IPs and even seasoned IPs, including how to make relationships on your units, how to use lean principles and processes, and even just how to speak to leadership and have nice, concise reports, meetings, and getting on agendas for those meetings. Just a lot of practical knowledge and tips for really any IP in the field. And her background was just so interesting, how she started out as a surgical tech and became an IP. That is something that always piques my interest. I love hearing all the diverse backgrounds people have and getting into the field. That is my kind of big soapbox. I'm the biggest cheerleader for diversity. What you got, Garrett?
I like that. And the big takeaway for me was that angry fish comment that she made, that when we do look at something that went wrong or not how we expected, that we can start the conversation with some good engagement and even a little bit of humor, as opposed to IPs coming down with a hammer. And I think that tone and tenor sets off a really good sustainable improvement. So great episode and a lot of great takeaways for IPs out there. And I think it's just a reminder, as we're always saying, infection stops where information starts.
Thanks for tuning in to the Transmission Control Podcast, where infection stops because information starts. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know. Connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating and share this episode with your team. Until next time, stay informed, stay vigilant, and keep transmission under control.